One of my cousins, we were visiting up my father's family in Maryland and mother's family down in Birmingham.
For years, she kept quiet. Not out of fear, but because she believed that the music would speak for itself. But respect, unrequited, is just a scar in an artist's heart. Emmylou Harris, the woman who once soothed broken hearts with her voice as soft as silk, has returned not to sing, but to tell. To tell about the silent wounds that only those in the profession can understand. 5 names. 5 people who once stood by her side, who once raised a glass behind the scenes, who once called her spiritual sister. Now, they are being called out by name, not because of scandal, but because they forgot the most sacred thing, loyalty to music and humanity. What you are about to hear is not a cruel word. It is a belated declaration, beautiful and cold as snow falling on an old country music background. Can you guess who made Emmylou Harris speak up after decades of silence? Like and subscribe now to discover the untold truth in this special video. That's what happened to Van Morrison. It wasn't a tour, it was a ritual. When Emmylou Harris and Van Morrison took the stage together in the early 2000s, the room held its breath. They didn't sing, they summoned. The fusion of 2 musical souls seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime miracle. But there was something no one in the audience saw that night. Behind the lights, the magic began to crack. The real Van Morrison was not the man the public worshipped. He was not warm, not kind, and absolutely knew no tenderness. The coldness of his eyes was enough to make the room sway. He didn't need to shout, just a word, a look, was enough to make Emmylou feel diminished. Not because he was big, but because he meant to. He said her voice was too soft for the blues, as if she were an aberration. The biggest wound wasn't an argument. It was when Morrison shouted at a technician for letting her solo sound too loud. It wasn't just an insult, it was a silent threat, don't cross me. That night, Emmylou didn't cry. She just quietly folded her dress, closed her suitcase, and decided there would be no more songs shared between them. Not a glance. Not a goodbye. Just a haunting low note in the final chapter of a beautiful dream. She thought she was used to the cold, the invisible thing in the gaze, in the words that split emotions. But then another silence appeared. Darker, sharper. It did not come from the gaze, but from Neil Young. Just a recording. A room that had witnessed many great meetings. Emmylou entered, carrying the arrangement, handwritten in a notebook whose edges were worn by years. She did not bring arrogance, only faith, that music is a dialogue. But when she raised her voice, expecting a dialogue, the only thing she received in return was an indifferent sentence, "Let me do it my way." There was no hostility, only indifference. And sometimes, it was crueler than any scolding. Emmylou recorded in silence, not a glance was exchanged. Then she left, still thinking that at least, her voice would stay. But a few weeks later, the truth appeared like a stain, her voice had been replaced. Not by someone else. But in a pale, hauntingly pale copy. Not a call, not a message. Just a cold disappearance, as if she had never existed. For a woman who lived for reconciliation, it was more than pain. It was a silent, deadly ritual of erasure. And Emmylou understood, not all betrayals make a sound. Some pass like smoke, but leave a wound that never heals. It was also painful for Lucinda Williams, who should have been allies, 2 silent warriors in a battlefield of prejudice. Emmylou Harris and Lucinda Williams, 2 names that seemed to come from opposite ends of the ego, but were actually 2 fragments of the same rebellion. Tough, tough. Bleeding for music, and never succumbing to the prejudice the industry had for women who refused to nod. Emmylou saw in Lucinda not a fellow star, but a mirror. Rough, dusty beauty, but still shining with authenticity. So when she asked Lucinda to sing a duet on a charity album, something simple, sincere, healing, she believed it was a moment when 2 kindred spirits could come together. Instead, Lucinda laughed. "I don't play those angel songs." It sounded like a joke. But Emmylou didn't laugh. The words didn't just deny her a song, they erased everything she had held dear, her trust, her kindness, and the way she chose to stand in this world, not screaming, not forcing, just giving. In that moment, the distance between them split. It was no longer art. It was cold alienation. Emmylou didn't confront, didn't speak up. But it engraved something irrevocable. When admiration is twisted into contempt, the pain doesn't explode. It smolders inside and burns away a part of you that you once believed was inviolable. It was a name she had kept as a sacred whisper, a name that represented a harmony that needed no explanation, a friendship that transcended the spotlight, a faith that music could not pretend to create. Willie Nelson. They had shared a stage, a journey, a deep, cold breath on the tour bus in the early morning. Cups of coffee that cooled amid the whispering of guitars. Ballads that could not be sung, only silence in the eyes. In Willie, Emmylou had seen a final companion, a man who lived at his own pace, but always oriented toward one constant, the truth. She had never thought that one day she would have to add his name to the list of people who had broken her heart. It happened when she spoke out against a tribute program that was essentially commercial, where memories of soldiers were twisted into marketing scripts, where music was twisted into a tool to attract sponsorship. Emmylou did not ask anyone to stand with her. She only wished Willie, who had written anti-war songs with her, would choose silence. That was all. But he performed. She called, no answer. She wrote, no reply. No excuses, no explanations, just an absence that stretched like an echo in an abandoned church. His silence was not gentle as the wind. It howled inside her, like an overstrained string in a storm. Not because he disapproved of her, but because he said nothing. Didn't look back. Wasn't there. For Emmylou, who had spent her life making music that mended invisible cracks between people, it was that silence that cut the deepest. It said that maybe, all along, they had never been on the same side. She had just blindly believed in empathy. And when someone like Willie disappeared without a sound, the memory didn't die. It began to crack. It came alive late at night, when Emmylou couldn't sing. When the notes suddenly turned into sharp knives. When the last trust has stopped breathing. And then there was the last name, not a legend, but a promise. A dangerously bright light. Ryan Adams. A name without a history, but one that held a future Emmylou hoped would not burn itself out. They met backstage at a tribute concert. She was steady serenity, he was ungrounded electricity. Young, chaotic, genius. And like all geniuses who have not yet figured themselves out, Ryan was an open wound, but in Emmylou's eyes, a wound worth healing. She didn't seek control. She offered him what the world often withholds from its unstable, kindness. Soft advice, flashy rejections, conversations about the truth in music, not applause. But Ryan didn't want tenderness. He craved adoration. And when she refused to record with him, for a song that was a lie, a strain, a lack of soul, he didn't step back and listen. He attacked. In the press, he derided her music as boringly angelic. And then the song came out. Without even mentioning her name, everyone knew he was talking about her. The words were like knives, cutting deep, stinging, and unmistakable. But Emmylou didn't answer. Didn't sing back. Didn't argue. Because not all wounds need to be opened in public. Some pains, especially when they come from someone you've tried to support, don't need words. They just need silence. And from there, she walked away. Not from the music, but from the illusion that sincerity is something that can be passed down through generations like a forest fire. She understood that some souls just want to burn, not for the light, but to see themselves burn in the fire. And some wounds aren't meant to heal. They exist only to remind you to be gentler next time you open a door. Emmylou Harris is still the woman who sang to Graham Parsons when he was on the brink of death, and still sings to him long after the world has forgotten. Still the same surreal voice, creeping through every record like a gentle ghost. Still the whisper that can squeeze your heart without ever having to hit a high note. But now, something has changed in that voice. A realization. A cleansing. A storm released not with thunder, but with chilling clarity. Because this is no longer a list of names. This is a ritual of sending off fragments of memories that seem small, but that bend the definition of trust. Wounds not of the profession, but of the heart. No one sees when it breaks, only when it changes color. They tried to make her smaller. With indifference. With insincere nods. With turns away when she most needed a look. And she accepted. Believed that silence was noble. That dignity is suffering. Until she understood, sometimes, dignity is knowing how to turn away. She didn't swallow her anger. She just didn't let it control her anymore. She didn't scream. But every time she raised her voice, it was a cruel cut into the fractured myths in her heart. This wasn't an accusation. It was a record. The wounds, some still bleeding, some healed, but all still warm. And Emmylou, who had turned country into a cathedral, who had brought the hymns down to earth, would no longer sing for those who would not bow to the sacredness of music. She was closing the door. Quietly, without fanfare. But don't forget, some doors, once closed, will never open again.